Welcome to the KPV podcast, and my name is KPV, of course. Today's guest is a powerful new voice in both storytelling and sports culture, Nick Peck. He is the author of Only Way Out, a debut novel that follows Jaylen Pierre, a teenager who finds purpose on the football field while navigating brutal challenges at home. And the book, Only Way Out, draws from Nick's own raw experiences growing up. And it's been called one of the best reads of the year by ESPN's Bobby Marks. And with 20,000 loyal followers on Instagram, Nick has built a community around honest conversations about resilience, mental health, and how young athletes can find hope and identity in sports. And if you've ever wondered how fiction can change lives or how mentorship can pull someone out of the fire, this episode is for you. So, Nick Peck, welcome, and how are you today?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me on the show. I'm super excited for this conversation.
Now, Nick, let's get into it. Your book is again titled Only Way Out. It's a novel about a character named Jaylen Pierre, or sorry, Jaylen Pierre, I should say. And he finds purpose on the football field while navigating, some difficult challenges at home. And I understand, Nick, you said that the character Jaylen and his story mirrors a lot of your own childhood. Was it emotionally difficult for you to write through that lens, or was it more like reclaiming power through fiction? What do you say about that?
Yeah, I would say it was probably more of the second, reclaiming power through fiction and, using, because, being an author is something I always wanted to do. And, being able to do it through the way of sharing my own story. It was almost therapeutic in a sense, working through things that I have dealt with myself, but then also getting to use my creative side of, being able to write a fiction book and, and copy, similar to the people that I looked up to growing up of reading stories of James Baldwin and Stephen King and those things, but also get to draw from my own experiences. So it was definitely more therapeutic than hard for me. It was difficult at some points, obviously it's a heavy read. There's, Jalen goes through a lot in it. But for me, it was more therapeutic, and like you said, I'm kind of more of trying to reclaim some of that power, but then also getting to share my voice as a fiction writer.
Now, you didn't start with hope, Nick. You start with heaviness, like abuse, suffocation, survival. Why was it important for readers to feel Jalen's weight before they could see his light?
Yeah, I mean, the title itself is Only Way Out. So I really wanted the readers to, really truly feel, the reason that he was looking for a way out and, that there were so many different things coming at him in different areas of his life. So it was important to me, to start, with, the heaviness and the darkness of the story so they could really see, what he was trying to, scratch and claw his way out of as he was, embarking on his journey.
Now, of course, we mentioned that the character Jalen and his journey mirrors aspects of your own. What was the moment you realized that this story had to be told and not just lived? Like, what made you want to write Only Way Out, and why now?
Yeah, so I kind of just tell my own background and personal background itself is kind of adds to it. So, I grew up in California myself, grew up around a lot of trauma, a lot of alcohol, and, just a lot of abuse. And so myself, I was kind of looking for my way out. And football, similar to Jalen, was my way out of my situation. And, I was lucky enough to get a full ride scholarship to play football. And then, once I finished my career, I jumped into the world of journalism and writing because I knew what I always wanted to do. But, like most athletes, when you quote unquote retire from sports, you're kind of, looking for, your next purpose, the next thing that you want to do. And for me, like I mentioned, I've always been, loved books, always looked up to authors, so I always wanted to do it. So I'm like, what, let me give it a try. And I just whipped out the laptop one day and just started writing Only Way Out. And I started doing it. And I'm like, it was one of those moments that clicked for me. It was like, okay, this is what I was born and meant to do. And so that's kind of what led me to do it and why now. And yeah, I feel like I'm living the dream, getting to do what I want to do every single day.
Well, I would say that the first few chapters, from what I remember after reading those first few chapters, they kind of move from brutal to beautiful without warning. And at least that's how I interpreted it. How do as a writer, because you're in journalism, you write, like how do you manage that emotional rhythm again from going from brutal to beautiful without leaving readers overwhelmed or without leaving readers, I guess, feel numb in a sense.
No, totally. And the reason I kind of, did that with this story specifically is because, I'm a big believer that all art you can tell when it's genuine or not, whether it's writing, a painting, or a photograph, you can see if there's a genuine nature to it. And, to me, that's what life is like. You don't necessarily get a warning when, life is brutal, or you don't get a warning when the next day you wake up and it's beautiful. So that's why, the story itself, I wrote it that way because I really wanted it to mirror, what real life is like so that, whoever was reading it, whether, gender, sexuality didn't matter, they could put themselves in that shoe and really see, what life is like. That transition is, you never know. One day you can wake up at the storm and the next day the sun is out. So that's kind of why I did it that way. I wanted to mirror, what real life is like.
Joining us today is Nick Peck, the author of Only Way Out. And, for myself being an English teacher, um, when I read, novels or read stories, some things jump out at me. And you mentioned, of course, being a writer now. I would say that for myself, when I was reading the chapters, some elements jump out, like some elements like the alarm clock or the trailer walk, even the mattress sharing. Those elements hit almost like visual metaphors, in my opinion. Do you think in symbolism like that when you write, or is that just instinctual?
I think with this story specifically, a lot of those things were symbolism for me. You know what I mean? Because, for me, walking to school is very symbolic and very symbolic of the story itself. And, the alarm clock, because I think most people can relate to, as the first chapter in the book starts, with Jaylen not wanting to hear his alarm clock. And that's something that, like most people can relate to. So, I wanted to use it as a sense of symbolism, but then, like I said, make it very genuine too. Because everyone can relate to a walk to a school, everyone can relate to the alarm clock. Most people can relate to having to share a book with, I mean, not a book, a bed with a sibling or something like that. So I would say it's probably a bit half and half, kind of just more natural storytelling, but then also as you can see through the story itself, they end up being very symbolic to the story.
And of course, being genuine, wanting the reader to kind of go through a little bit what you felt. And you wrote about trauma with such clarity and restraint. Like, did you ever worry that it would be like too much, quote unquote, or was staying true to your lived reality more important than just protecting the reader?
Yeah, no, that's definitely something I dealt with myself because obviously someone who's gone through trauma, I don't necessarily want to trigger people, initially. So that's, I kind of try to find, that perfect balance in the story of, being very brutally honest of the feelings and emotions that you feel when you go through certain types of trauma. But then also you're not, not getting too, I don't want to say gory, but too gory, of too in depth in the details where it can be, extremely triggering for someone and stuff like that. So it was definitely a balance that I had to find for myself as I was kind of developing the story of, how in depth you want to go and then, how in depth I didn't want to go.
Again, we're speaking with Nick Peck, the author of Only Way Out. And I want to touch specifically on a moment early on when Jaylen, the character in the novel, literally gets choked by his father. But of course, emotionally, he was already suffocating even before that. Can you talk about how trauma shaped his survival instincts?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think any trauma shapes your survival instincts because you're naturally just kind of living in a survival mode, every single day. Whether and that can be, physical abuse, emotional abuse, all the above. You're living that way. But Jalen's character, it's himself, it really shaped the way he took on that protective nature of it. And, that really shaped his character development throughout the stories because, the trauma really shaped him having to protect, those around him and taking on those, abuses for everyone around him. So that's how I would say, the trauma really shaped his character itself.
Again, the novel is called Only Way Out, and this novel follows Jaylen Pierre, a teenager who finds purpose on the football field while navigating brutal challenges at home. And the writer is Nick Peck, who is speaking with us today. Now, with football itself, obviously, mentorship is a big part of that. With the coaching staff, the head coach that comes into the football player's life. I would say that mentorship is kind of subtle but powerful in your story, in the story Only Way Out. Coach Buster specifically, were there real mentors in your life who helped keep you from slipping through the cracks, if you will?
Oh, for sure. Coach Buster is actually, it's based on a character in real life, and his name was actually Coach Buster. He unfortunately, when I was in high school, passed away. And so this is, kind of an homage to him in the story, of using his, nickname in the book to be able to pay the homage to what he did for me while I was in high school and, going through things. He was one of those first few adults in my life, similar to Jaylen, that really, showed love and true care for me, and not necessarily because I was a good football player, but just because you could truly feel the care for me as a human. And similar to how Coach Buster is portrayed in the book as well. You can feel those sorts of things as well. And so yeah, Coach Buster, he genuinely gave me lots of love and care when I was in high school, and I wanted to pay homage to him in my book that way too. So yeah, and I try to make it very subtle as well in that sense too. So it wouldn't take too away from too much of the story, but it's a very important part of my story, but also Jalen's story as well.
And I guess when readers who know you personally, did they make the connection with the name Buster, Coach Buster? Did they make that connection? And if so, what was that conversation like when people reached out to you and said, "Oh, that's Coach Buster, the coach that I guess mentored you in your own life." Like, does this
Yeah,
happen?
oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, and it's been really cool to see, because Coach Buster not only, he not only helped me, but also helped so many of my, old teammates as well. And it's been really powerful to see, a lot of my teammates, relive those memories of, how much of an effect Coach Buster did have on them as well. And just not realizing that the little subtle things that he did for each and every one of us, really helped us a lot, regardless of what we were all going through.
Again, we're speaking with Nick Peck, the author of Only Way Out, a debut novel that follows Jaylen Pierre, a teenager who finds purpose on the football field while navigating some very difficult challenges at home. And for any writer, Nick, they would tell you that writing is something that takes a lot out of you. It takes a lot of time to get your thoughts on paper or on a computer in this case. Talk about that process a little bit. Like, what was it like in terms of getting the routine of sitting down and writing it? Did you have to take a break from that from time to time? Like, did you have to deal with writer's block? And how long did it take you to ultimately finish and say, okay, this is perfect. Finish this and it's going to be published. So what was that process like for you, Nick?
Yeah, no, the process itself of actually writing it, I speak to a lot of authors and writers a lot now, and they get surprised when I give this answer. But, for me, it was kind of easy, to be completely honest, because luckily, being an athlete, I'm very, naturally dedicated and kind of already have my routines. So basically what I did is, I just started waking up an hour early every single day, and just set a goal for myself of writing, 10 pages a day, and did that for about 6 months and, was doing that. And it just kind of, like I said, when I was doing it, it was just kind of, I was in a very much of a flow state. And I think I kind of attribute that to it being my purpose, but then also being, it's, I'm getting up early in the morning and doing it. It's very quiet, not very much distraction. And it's the first thing that I'm doing. So it's just kind of able to flow out more naturally. And then to answer your question though, of, when did I feel like it was perfect? I am also still an athlete. So, being a perfectionist is, in my blood. So I never truly felt like it was going to be perfect. And even still, I'm still will go back and see things and like, I should have did this or should have done that. Um, but I was lucky enough to contribute with a really good publisher that was able to help me you know get over a lot of that perfectionism and be like, no, this is really great. You're doing fine, and those kind of things. But so that was a lot of my process. Luckily for me, I was just kind of in a flow state as I was writing the book itself, and didn't really deal with too much writer's block on it. And I kind of attribute that to also, being a journalist during my workday and then being able to do this after. So, I was kind of getting to use both sides of the brain. So, I don't my writer's block would not necessarily come because, I cover finance and journalism. So it's very much, straight to the book, very short sentences and those kind of things. So it's kind of like, good practice for me to go into, the next morning and whether I was writing at night as well, the book. But, yeah, luckily I didn't deal with it too much. I was in the flow state.
Now, it's interesting. It feels like you have an advantage, almost an advantage being an athlete, because I was speaking with a mental performance coach recently, just last week actually, a gentleman by the name of Gary Chupick, and he, is again a mental performance coach who worked with football players, athletes in general, and he said the same thing about how athletes, the successful ones, they are motivated to do the same routine, or I guess he called it the rhythm, having the same rhythm every day. It's not just a habit anymore, but it's something that you do to push yourself because you know you'll be successful. I'm paraphrasing a little bit. And so I guess that kind of helped you a lot. And for myself as a writer, there are days when I don't feel motivated to do anything. I'll give you an example. Like I just had a stretch of 10 days of free time almost. And I said I'm gonna, sit down and write for hours every day for like 10 days. But with first half, I did literally nothing. And it was something where I was not able to be, I guess, disciplined enough. I only was able to do a few things the last half of those 10 days, but the first half, I literally did not, I guess, give myself that push. So I think, I guess when you said, or when you mentioned that maybe it was surprising for other writers that you speak with, that they're surprised that you are able to, actually just do it. I think that makes some sense after having spoken with Gary Chupick earlier about, a mental performance coach who's worked with athletes about talking about just basically getting that rhythm and just doing it every day. But that's great. That's good for you. Happy to hear that. That's
No,
outstanding.
it's like I call it like a cheat code almost. I didn't because I was doing it for so many years, you know what I mean, of waking up early and having to perform every single day. It's just kind of, second nature to me. So as I hung up my cleats and transitioned out of it just kind of became second nature. And then, as I took on new projects like writing this book, it just, I just shifted, the goals and my routines and, kind of kept that along.
It's outstanding. Well, we mentioned earlier about the abusive trauma, about mentorship, and also the character Jaylen in your book, Only Way Out. Jaylen reads like somebody who grew up too soon, somebody shaped by silence, responsibility, and pain. So being that the character is based on your life, how close is it to your own younger self? Like, would you classify yourself as someone who grew up too soon and dealing with all these different elements? What could you say about that?
Yeah, for sure. Those are, emotions, everything in there that he felt and those kind of things are emotions that I felt, of growing up, and those things and feelings of, feeling like you have to be a grown up and take on responsibility and, search for a way out of your situation and things like that. So I would say, it is something that I dealt with myself and, something I still deal with. I am only 24 years old, but, still dealing with it of, only being 24 years old and being like I'm only 24 years old, and taking advantage of those kind of things. So yeah, and it makes me really happy to hear that you picked out on all those things because that's those were the goals of the book. So I love that you were able to pick up on those tendencies of Jaylen in his character.
Now, I'll admit, Nick, it's been a couple of weeks since I read some parts of the book specifically, but I do remember the mention of a deck of playing cards. If I remember correctly, it had to do with Jaylen conditioning his body using a deck of playing cards, if I remember correctly. And that's a powerful image. Can you touch on that a little bit? Like, I'm guessing that's drawn from your own life. Um, yeah, so what can you say about that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm not sure if you can see on the camera, but I've got, a deck of cards tattooed on me, right here, actually. So it is strictly based on my life. Like those deck of cards actually took from Ray Lewis. Ray Lewis, the famous football linebacker, I heard him one time say when I was growing up, say that he used a deck of cards and would do push-ups and sit-ups. And, I took that homage, and it saved me a lot in my life. And I still have the same deck of cards. I still carry it around with me everywhere I go, but it's those going and doing push-ups. For me, when I was growing up in my situation was, it was like my meditation a lot of the time. And, flipping the cards is what, kind of saved me in those situations. And so, that's another point, if someone truly knows me, like I have a little sister, and when she was reading the book, that was the first thing she said to me, was like, the deck of cards, oh my gosh, the deck of cards. Like she knew exactly what it was, because it's been such a big part of my life, and I wanted to put that in the story as well. I love that you picked up on that too. That's awesome to hear.
That's outstanding, Nick. You mentioned earlier you're still pretty young, 24 years old. I mean, and we're all humans. We're not robots. Are there moments, um, are there moments that still kind of bother you or wreck you when you reread, when you go back and reread the things that you've written? Um, how will you respond to that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think like with any trauma, I think it sticks with you for life. That's why they call it trauma. It's like it's a wound that you can't deal with. So definitely, as I was writing it, like I mentioned, like it was very therapeutic for me. Not only just like the events that Jaylen goes through, but just like the feelings and emotions and those kind of things. And I still deal with it daily, but like luckily I've built routines and stuff for myself, such as going to therapy and meditation and yoga and all those kind of things that kind of help me, make them not feel as strong as they once did, if that makes sense. And yeah, so it's still definitely there's parts of it that is rough and those kind of things, but I think that's there's power in telling a story, and Jaylen's story is a very powerful one, that I think most people can relate to, and of triumph and trials and tribulations, just like life is.
Well, there's also the mention of Elijah in the story, and there's from my interpretation, there was some kind of unspoken love or connection between Jaylen and Elijah. So, um, what made you center that? Um, what made you center that bond? I understand it as a sibling bond instead of a different dynamic, or if I did I interpret that incorrectly?
No, no, you interpret it exactly correct. It's based off of my relationship with me and my little sister, that I mentioned. And, that relationship that we have, and actually, my dedication in my book is dedicated. It says dedicated to all of it, and I have that tattoo tatted on me in my sister's handwriting, because as we were growing up, we would look at each other and we were going through things, and we would look at each other and be like, "What's wrong?" And we would just go, "All of it." So it was just one of those things for us. And my relationship with my sister was really important for me, similar to how Jaylen's relationship with Elijah is very important to him. Had I not had her, I'm not sure if I would have had the motivation to look for ways out, and could have went different paths. But having a little sister to want to take myself out of my situation for and try to make myself better for her and for us, was really important. So that's why I really wanted to put that relationship in there, just how important there is that that unspoken love, and care for one another, because it's very similar to my life. But also I think a lot of people can relate to that, kind of trauma bond or trauma bond with your sibling when you grow up in similar situations like that as well. So I wanted to add that for the audience as well.
Now, who would you say would be the audience for this novel? And because there's a bit of trauma obviously in there, so what would be the audience? Who would be the audience for the book, and what would you want the takeaway to be after they have read it?
Yeah, I mean, I wrote the book, in the sense of the audience being for pretty much anyone, old, young, definitely, because some of the harsher topics that are discussed in it, I would hope that, teenagers are reading it. They're not necessarily going to be for children, because of, some of the harsher topics that is discussed in there. But, preteens, 12, I'd probably say like 13 and up, is probably, versus what kids see on social media today, the book probably isn't as bad as that. So I would say probably most people, could read the book and put themselves in Jaylen's shoes. And I wrote it in that sense, wanting it to be for, all races, all genders, all sexualities, everyone who's dealt with trauma and those kind of things. And the message, itself is, only way out, is just like that no matter what life throws at you, there's so many different seasons of life and so many different trials and tribulations. But the biggest thing is just don't quit, and continue to find your way out. But then also, the book is, very surrounded around building, I like to call it like your created family or your chosen family that Jaylen finds. And so I also want people to know, just because you may not have an immediate family that you can rely on, you can also build a good family around you, whether that be in Jaylen's case, his teammates and his coaches, and then eventually his girlfriend's family and them, and those kind of things. So, I think the biggest thing is just don't quit on your journey, but then also, that you're able to build, a good chosen family.
We're speaking with Nick Peck, the author of the novel Only Way Out. Nick, you've done multiple interviews already, I'm sure. What is one question that nobody has asked you yet about this book, but you wish that they would?
No one, surprisingly, like you said, I've been on a media tour and been doing a bunch of different interviews, and surprisingly, no one's asked me about the cover. Um, Surprisingly enough, and that is one that I would love someone to ask for sure.
Would, would you like to share the answer to that question?
Of course, thank you so much for asking. So the cover itself, it's the backpack is a backpack that I used in high school. The hoodie, the way that Jaylen looks is, loosely based on how I looked. The street in the back is the street that I used to walk on when I was a kid as well. And so I collaborated, with the art department of my publisher to create this, so that it could be, you know, very true. Like I said, the book's loosely based on my own life, so I wanted it to have those true, genuine feelings. And the hoodie that he's wearing, I still have the hoodie. I still have the backpack and those kind of things. And so that was kind of the inspiration behind it. And then obviously, with it being a darker themed book, with so many different, darker topics covered, I wanted it to be in all black. And then also, Jalen's face, I didn't want to be completely shown because I also, as my own reader, I love to create, my own characters in my head. That's one of my favorite things. And so I wanted to give my audience the chance to be able to create, picture what they wanted Jaylen to look like as well. But yeah, I appreciate you asking.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, of course. And I think that quite often, as a writer, and I've had the same experience. I'm thinking like I'm wishing that somebody would ask me this question, but then the interview goes on and finishes and ends without that question being asked, and I just thought I would ask you. But I do want to also ask some other ones as far as, I mentioned at the top that Only Way Out has been called one of the best reads of the year by ESPN's Bobby Marks. Like that would be huge in terms of getting endorsement like that. Did you know Bobby Marks beforehand, or how did you manage to get in touch with him to have him read the book?
Yeah, luckily, being in sports, all the people that I got review quotes from, I've been able to, be around a lot of, really cool people. and get to know a lot of really cool people. Like also outside of Bobby, who also gave a quote. I had a guy I went to high school with. His name I not went to high school with, but went to my high school. His name's Josh Andrews, but he won a Super Bowl. And those kind of things. So I get to be around a lot of those people. And the way I went about it is like most athletes do. You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So I just shot my shot, and saw if Bobby would be interested, and he was interested, and luckily he I think if I remember correctly, he sent an email back. He read it all within one day. He enjoyed it that much, which was even more awesome. To have that glowing review that he also gave, but also that he said that he couldn't put it down, which is even better. Just super grateful for all the people that gave me review quotes, and super grateful for Bobby of ESPN giving me an awesome quote.
That's fabulous. And now, of course, being an athlete, you mentioned Nick earlier about not quitting and missing 100% of the shots you don't take. So here's a question, and you don't have to name any names, obviously, but was there anybody that you reached out to like multiple times before they responded, or they never responded and you had to give up? I can tell an example. I spoke with an author of hockey books, and he told me a story about how he emailed the superstar goalie Patrick Waugh like 30 times, 33 times, 34 times by email before Patrick Waugh finally responded, or his people responded, and the author was able to nail down an interview. So that took persistence. I can't see myself doing that with like 30 plus times trying to reach out to somebody. So did anything like that happen to you? Would you like to share anything like that with the listeners?
What's with mine, I was actually very strategic with who I wanted to reach out with. So I have three review quotes. And they're all from three different, parts of my life, which is what I wanted to do since the book encapsulates my life. So as I mentioned, like Josh Andrews, he was someone that went to one of the second high school I went to, which is a part of my story. And so I wanted to get someone from there. And then my other friend, who's also a wide receiver, a professional wide receiver, so playing ball, Eric, he was my teammate at as well. So I wanted that incorporation. And then Bobby being a journalist himself and me being in the transition of in the journalism world myself, I wanted, Bobby to be part of that. So, luckily I was very strategic with who I wanted. And, luckily I didn't have to, reach out too many times. And, was grateful to have some good people around me willing to help out. But yeah, I was actually very strategic, which I think definitely helped me in that sense. So I wasn't, shooting for the stars, so to speak. I was, being very strategic with the people that I had in my life.
That's outstanding, Nick. Again, we're speaking with Nick Peck, the author of Only Way Out, a debut novel that follows Jaylen Pierre, a teenager who finds purpose on the football field while navigating brutal challenges at home. And the book draws from Nick's own raw experiences growing up and has been called one of the best reads of the year by ESPN's Bobby Marks. Now, Nick, final couple things. How do listeners, readers stay up to date with your latest happenings? And yeah, we'll start there.
Yeah, no, my latest happenings, I'm very active on Instagram. I try to keep it very simple. Luckily, I've got a really easy name to remember. So it's just at Nick Peck Author on my Instagram. I'm very active on there, posting all my interviews and those things. And then also I have a website, which is nickpeckauthor.com. Like I said, try to not make it too difficult for the audience, which very active on there. And you can find the links to where my book is located at, and, also a contact page and stuff like that.
And that's awesome. Finally, Nick, of course, you're in finance as a journalist, you mentioned, and of course, this novel is about your life, and or I guess the book draws from your experiences, I should say, growing up. So, are there going to be any other writing projects coming up as far as novels or books are concerned? What can you tell
Oh,
listeners about that?
yeah, for sure. That's like I said, this when I first started doing this, it felt like it was what I was born and meant to do. And so, I plan on continuing to write novels the rest of my life. Like most, writers, I had a bunch of different ideas in my head and kind of was looking forward to, jumping into different genres and things like that. But the overwhelming support that I received via email, via direct messages, via letters from people, because the book itself also ends on a bit of a cliffhanger. And so people have been asking me, "Oh, there's got to be a book two. There's got to be a book two." So I think I might have boxed myself in a hole of maybe writing a book two for Only Way Out and see where Jaylen heads next. But definitely, I plan on writing novels the rest of my life. And, like I said, this is like a dream come true to me to be able to, be an author. And, at this point too, I forgot to mention this, but, a few weeks ago, I became an Amazon best-selling author, so it's a true dream come true. And, getting those kind of accolades and that kind of recognition has been super awesome. So yeah, I plan on continuing to do it for as long as I can.
Well, congratulations, Nick. That's outstanding. Again, you can follow Nick Peck at Nick Peck Author on Instagram and also the website, nickpeckauthor.com. Outstanding. So thank you so much, Nick Peck, for joining us today, and all the best with your novel, Only Way Out. And we'll be in touch. Thank you for joining me on the KPV podcast this afternoon.
Thank you so much. Appreciate the opportunity.